The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
From his debut volume, Poachers, through the novels Hell at the Breach and Smunk, Tom Franklin's reputation has grown steadily. His newest, Crooked Letter, is the story of a white man perhaps unjustly ostracized by his community as a murderer and the local black constable who had been his childhood friend. Franklin and his wife, the poet Beth Ann Fennelly, have, courageously, collaborated on a novel, Tilted World, which is to be released in the fall of 2013. I spoke with Tom Franklin at Northeast Community College in Rainesville, Alabama. Tom, it's good to see you again.
And you too, Don. Thanks for having me back.
We are, for the first time, you and I together at Northeast Community College in Alabama. What are we doing here? What are you doing here? What are your chores here?
Well, I'm going to talk to you first, then answer a few questions, and I'm going to do a presentation in the morning and sign more books, I hope, and then have lunch with students.
Your presentation is going to be mostly about Crooked Letter.
Right.
Is that the communal read here?
I think, yes, it is.
Right.
It is. I'm very honored for that.
Right. You've done that before, though. Other places have done that book, right?
I have, yeah, Ole Miss did it where I teach, which is really fun. The other day, a Hummer passed me, and some kid rolled down the window and said, "I liked your book." And out of a Hummer.
Yes. The right answer is, "I hate your car."
I was flattered. I began to smile kindly upon his Hummer at that point.
Yeah, I wouldn't get carried away.
Yeah.
You've had this now. Congratulations. You are a tenured professor at Ole Miss.
Thank you.
And Beth Ann is a tenured professor at Ole Miss.
My wife is, yeah,
Yep.
and also my boss. She directs the MFA program, and I teach in that program.
We'll get back to your marriage in a bit. And we will, literally, because of shared projects that you and your wife have. But even though you've been in Mississippi for a while now, you are an Alabama boy.
Yes.
You're a South Alabama person, right?
Right.
Dickinson?
Dickinson.
Where's that?
It's in Clark County, which is 2.5 hours south of Montgomery and an hour and a half north of Mobile. 45 minutes west of Monroeville.
Right at the center of things, then. Yeah. Did you go to South Alabama? Did you go to
I
Mobile?
did, undergraduate, yeah. Took me 9 years to get a BA there.
Is that right?
Yes.
You did a lot of really manual labor for a while, didn't you? I mean, working in factories, working with your hands.
Yeah, I worked for 4 years at a plant that made sandblasting grit, often at night, going to school during the day.
Uh-huh.
I did 4 years at chemical plants, cleaning up hazardous waste. That's my toughest quarter, as they did then, was where I took 5 classes and worked 80 hours a week while commuting an hour each way to the chemical plant.
This is inspirational.
Yeah. That's why it took me that long to get a BA, because I had lots of work, and also took lots of classes I didn't need. I didn't realize that you had an advisor you can go to, and he would say, "Don't take 19 writing workshops. You only need 3 of those." So I wasted a lot of hours. I mean, wasted is the wrong word. I spent a lot of hours that I could have utilized better.
Right. A lot of your fiction is vaguely autobiographical, but the one I think that comes closest to an actual experience is a story called Grit, which takes place in that sandpaper factory. Is that a...
Yeah, this plant still exists. It is just south of Mobile. No, I'm sorry, just north of Mobile.
Yeah.
On Interstate 65, right before the Satsuma exit. If you're headed away from Mobile, look to your right, through the trees, you'll see these giant green tanks. I've spent 4 years there. My uncle was the millwright, he just retired, but the plant is still there. I've gone and visited it a couple of times.
Yeah. It's fun to talk to people who have worked with their hands, with their backs. They complain so much less about how hard writing is and how hard teaching is, because they have actually done really hard work.
I mean, I at the chemical plant, I would be wearing a plastic suit and in a helmet with air pumped in, with the gloves taped over my gloves, boots taped over my boots, and I'd be standing up to my knees in hazardous waste, turning an augering samples out of the ground at 4 a.m. That's hard work.
Yeah.
Sitting down at your computer to try to tell a story is not hard work.
For most people, it's impossible work, and they shouldn't try.
Right, I agree. We need more readers and fewer writers.
You had a lot of success right off the bat with a story collection called Poachers, which won the Edgar, and it for a debut volume. It's very impressive. But I want to spend a minute with Hell at the Breach, because that's your home territory book. That's the book. It has to do with the Mitcham Wars, the
Yes.
Clark County Wars. Give me a sentence description of that book. The town versus the country. What goes on there?
The 1890s.
Yeah.
It's really poor sharecroppers against really slightly less poor store owners in town. And the sharecroppers got really tired of being beat down. Had a politician who ran, a friend of theirs. He is mysteriously murdered. They assumed the town did it and formed a gang called Hell at the Breach. It happened about 12 miles from where I grew up in Clark County, Alabama. And my 11th grade English teacher had a grandfather who was part of the conflict.
Right. The thing about that book, you could describe it as class warfare, and it is. I guess you'd have to say it was.
I'd say so, yes.
Except what you had there were a whole lot, as you just suggested, a whole lot of very poor whites going to war with a whole lot of also very poor whites, except that they saw themselves as very different. The townspeople, the people who owned the store, the general store, the pharmacy, were seen by the country people as somehow elites.
Yes, they didn't work, they didn't toil in the fields all the time.
Uh-huh.
They didn't have cotton planted up to their steps because they had to plant every inch they could with cotton.
Right.
They had jobs where they stayed inside and swept floors and sold things and owned the land that the poor people worked on. So you see why the poor people had anger issues.
Yeah, it's a question of perspective. It's interesting. I mean, I don't have that knowledge in my own life, but from my perspective, which is apparently at the moment very Olympian, looks like these people all look alike to me, but they don't feel alike to each other. That is a very violent book, and it opens. In fact, the opening scene is what?
A boy drowning 6 puppies.
Yeah. Now that's not a recipe for wide readership.
No, it's not.
Very few people are entranced by.
I used to read that section when I promoted that book on book tour, and my publicist called me and said, "Stop reading that. Nobody wants to read about puppies being drowned."
Right.
She said, "You may have even reconsidered opening the book that way," and maybe I should have. It won the Alabama Library Association's award for adult fiction, which I think sounds like porn. Adult fiction, but it simply means it's not a children's book. But it won it in 2006, and the book came out in 2003. It won 3 years later because one librarian hated the way it opened so much and loved her dog so much she would not vote for it or let it win. When she retired, it won.
I did not know that. That's wonderful.
I think it's wonderful, yeah.
It's also how much power can one librarian have? Apparently enough. That book, Poachers, has violence in it. Hell at the Breach has a good deal. Smunk, the next book, which we can't spend too much time with, is a kind of a fiesta of carnage. So violence, the dark, the amount of cruelty that people are capable of doing to one another is something that you have thought about a lot and used a lot in your work. Not that you're never funny, because sometimes you are.
Thank you.
But a lot of these books have a good deal of pain. And obviously you have, I don't know if you have a theory, but pain, this whole business of cruelty and pain and violence means something to you. It's important to you. How do you talk about cruelty, violence, pain, what people do to each other?
I think when it comes to violence, I'm very afraid of it in my own life, of physical pain, of being hit in the face or kneed in the stomach. That worries me. If I get into a situation, say in a bar, and it's getting ugly, I can usually extricate myself through talking. I don't have to resort to violence. But part of me admires people who are so in control of themselves and their world and any room that they can, if they need to, resort to violence and be okay with it. Because I don't have that gene or that ability. It's something that I write toward. And I'm fascinated by people who have presence of mind in violent situations. So I think it's simply a matter of writing toward who I want to be.
Please correct me if you think this is a faulty paraphrase, but you want to be a more violent person? What?
I want to not be afraid of violence. I want to be that cool guy in a bar who doesn't fight unless he has to defend other people, to be kind of a hero. So I see, Smunk in my book, Smunk. I see Smunk as a heroic type because he controls his world.
Right.
For that reason.
But you must think, he said, that human nature, that we humans by nature have a good deal of the dark in us.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of it.
I do think that, and it's also an interesting place to dig. When I was writing Crooked Letter, it occurred to me at some point that someone has to have done this. I'd not written a crime novel before necessarily, or a mystery necessarily. And I'm just writing about the people, about Larry Ott and Silas Jones, who I'm fascinated by. And the book is due in a few months, and it occurred to me that I've got to have a culprit. There are 2 girls missing, and I know who did away with one girl, but the new girl, the most recent one, I have no idea. I had to come up with a culprit, and that was hard. And one possibility was the foreman at the mill. And I began to construct a scenario that would cause a man with a relatively good job, foreman at a lumber mill, to deteriorate and become a monster. So, I just didn't know what to do. I began, I thought, well, drugs and the internet. That's a good combination to equal a monster. So, but how do I get him onto drugs? So I gave his wife cancer and had him get her medical marijuana, illegally, of course, because it's illegal in Alabama. Or in Mississippi too, where the book is set. And I had him, she dies, but he liked the medical marijuana so much that he smoked a lot more of it, and it led, as a gateway drug, as we are told it will, by the powers that be, to other drugs, and that led him onto the internet. And it was just this awful spiral of internet porn and drugs, and I really did not enjoy writing it. It was a dark place I didn't enjoy going to.
Yes.
So I unspiraled that and came up with another person who did
So
it.
this whole business of this fellow who's a foreman at the mill, it's not in the book.
No,
Maybe it'll be in some future book.
probably not. It was really dark. I really don't. I don't want to go. I don't want to go there again. But it's funny, when I start to work on something, it tends toward the dark. There is even in Hell at the Breach a moment where one of the 16-year-old point of view characters, whose name is Mac Burke, is sent down to do a very dirty deed. His drunk gangmates have tried to hang a rival bootlegger, and they're so drunk they mishang him, if that's an expression, to mishang. He doesn't die. It's actually hard to hang somebody if you don't do it right. He doesn't die, and they think he's dead. They drag him down the hill. Mac has dug a grave for him. They have Mac kick him in there and say, cover him up. Well, they go back up and drink some more, and Mac sees that he's moving. He's not dead. I had Mac call them down, and they had Mac shoot him. And Mac became then a trusted member of the gang. My agent read this and said, no, Mac can't shoot because we'd lose sympathy with him. And so you see where my dark temperament normally takes me. That's a very darker character who would shoot this man, and a much more likable character who would save the man.
Right. There is a moment in Hell at the Breach, which I think is an emblematic moment, where a dying man is tortured by some children, and Wordsworth would not approve of this particular depiction of innocent youth. And I think that's the acid test. If children are capable of such behavior, then all humans are capable of such behavior.
Well, children are. We have to train children not to. You know how cruel children are. I'm raising 3. I see how cruel they are. I see my 2-year-old with ants. It's just, spat, splat. And I didn't teach him this. I let spiders go.
Right.
He doesn't learn cruelty to insects from me.
I have asked you in different conversations about, and this is always a futile question, but I have asked you about the autobiographical elements in your book. For instance, Hell at the Breach is essentially your home county, and you have told me, in fact, that the Mississippi Crooked Letter is based on your Dickinson, on your home territory.
Yeah.
But I remember asking you how, or actually, I don't think it was a question. I was saying there's nothing autobiographical about Crooked Letter. You can't be Silas, 32. You are not a black policeman. And you can't be Larry, because Larry is the ostracized, friendless, shunned creature. But you are?
Yeah.
Tell me again about that. Where's the sense of identification between you and Larry, I presume?
Larry Ott and I have almost everything in common. I wrote most of that book. I started it in 2003, but I really floundered for years. And I quit and wrote Smunk for about a year and a half, somewhere in 2004, 2005, and went back to what became Crooked Letter. And I wrote probably 9/10 of it in Brazil in a 5-month period, after having treaded water, or just treaded, what's it called when you're scratching, you're not making any track with no traction for years in Alabama and Mississippi. But down in South America, writing about the American South, I could not go walk the land and see how the pine trees smell and put that in my book, or see the shell of an armadillo, put that in the book. I'm in a whole different country.
Right.
And it was deeply weird in a lot of ways, very different from our country. So what I did was, I think I relied on memory. And so the more I was in my memory, the more I began to use my own past. So where Larry Ott has a mechanic father, I do. He is obsessed with Stephen King, as I was. A Monster Mask, snakes, comic books, horror novels, all those things I did. I was obsessed with the mail. There's a scene where Larry is invited to a haunted house because he has a mask.
Yeah.
That happened to me. I was unpopular as Larry is. Lived out in the country as Larry does. Pardon me. Larry's first date and only date is my first and only date. He takes a girl to the drive-in movie. She has to get out and go see her real boyfriend. He goes alone to the movie. I did that.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I know. It's really sad now.
It is now.
It's sad. But I mean, I'm happy here, and and the book has done well, and we're talking. So it was a sad childhood, but it's a happy adulthood. Yeah. And I'd rather have that than the opposite.
Oh, you bet.
But I mean,
things getting better is tolerable. Yeah.
It is. And I got a great wife and 3 great kids. But anyway, I mean, I sat at the drive-in by myself in a car, and people I knew pulled in behind me, and I'm alone at the drive-in. I took the blanket I brought, held it up beside my head like Larry does.
Yeah.
But for me, there were no real consequences except, possible embarrassment. But, to make it fiction, one has to raise the stakes.
Right.
For Larry, she's never seen again. Right. And so there's real consequences for his awry date.
Right. Well.
So many other things. The things that we have that are disparate are different. I mean, my father was a very kind, loving man, and I was not as lonely as Larry was. I had a brother and cousins, where Larry's an only child.
Yeah, Larry's dad.
He's an alcoholic and very abusive.
Yeah.
Verbally and physically.
Why 2 women would want anything to do? Why 1 woman would want anything to do with him is a mystery, but he has 2, which seems to me just wrong.
Well, when he's away from his family, he's a different guy. He's popular and tells stories and is very funny. He's unhappily married, and that's where his bitterness comes from.
Right. Stories of any Southern writer, any Southern fiction writer is going to spend some time on the subject of race. It's inevitable. It doesn't matter if the novel is set in 1840 or 1940 or 2010. It's always somewhere. Some of your books, it is peripheral. Like in Hell at the Breach, there are some black folks in Clark County, but it's not their war, basically.
Right.
They're just, once in a while they get caught in the crossfire, but it's not their war. But this Mississippi book, Crooked Letter, you have how much time passes? Is it 20 years that passed from the
Yeah.
time of the first murder to the time of the second. And therefore, things have changed. And tell me if you agree. If you have a novel in which the constable for that town is a black man, then things have gotten better. Things have improved. Is
Yes.
that fair?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you're now living there, you see it around you. Are you optimistic about the question? Are things really getting better as they are in your book?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it just takes time and it takes generations. And
Right.
it takes my generation to do better than the previous generation. And I know people now, friends of mine from Alabama from growing up, who themselves are struggling with racism. I mean, I think it's something that's taught, but I also think it's can be a kind of addiction to where you almost enjoy the anger it can call. It can call up into your heart, as it were. But I see that those people are fighting those feelings, and I see that their children are not growing up the way their parents did, where the N-word was thrown around very casually, as it wasn't when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I do see it getting better. The way that I think that gay marriage is sooner or later going to happen. Most people want it to happen, but there's just a certain set of guards who are against it, and they have a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know who those guards are.
Well, there are people who insist on being on the wrong side of history.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
I have friends who still are very agitated about how we didn't win in Vietnam. I'm over it myself.
Right.
I think we could move on to other grievances.
I didn't plan for that book to be about race relations at all.
No,
It
it's
was-
not directly.
No,
but
but
you,
I plan to avoid it again.
uh-huh.
I mean, I avoided it, I thought, successfully in Hell at the Breach.
Right.
I kept it in the background pretty
Right.
much. And it's a little bit in Poachers, and it's not really at all in Smunk. But I had the constable character, and I had the mechanic character, both white.
Right.
And it was only when a friend of mine, David Wright, who's an African-American writer, suggested, he said it'll be a deeper, more interesting book if you make this cop a black man.
Yes.
And I would never have even considered that, thinking I won't want to appropriate any other race's voice. I'm doing it third person, not I. I'm not doing it as Catherine Saka did in The Help, where she actually is a ventriloquist for the other race. I'm doing it third person, camera over his shoulder.
Right.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. But I would not have even tried that if David hadn't given me permission.
Yeah.
And he read the book for me in manuscript and found several places where I got it wrong and called me and said, a black man wouldn't think this. A black woman would not think this.
Right. Well, it's good. It's good. Well, I mean, how one is not clairvoyant.
Right.
You
right.
need, once in a while, you need expert advice.
Yeah.
You have a book coming out in October, you and your wife. And here's what I know. I've read the first half because I've only seen the galleys. But you and Beth Ann have written a novel together. And you are still married, and the book is finished, and things seem to be going well. How does a husband and wife team, how do you do it? How did you do it? Why did you do it? Isn't it dangerous?
It's very high-stakes poker, as my cousin said.
Yeah.
It is dangerous, and we worried. It came about because I wrote a very bad zombie story years ago, and a friend of mine, Carolyn Haynes, edited a book called Mississippi Noir, about Mississippi noir, and she said, do I have a story? I said, no, I've got a zombie story. She said, I don't want a zombie story. But she said, if you rewrite it and set it in Mississippi in 1927, when the Delta flooded,
Right.
it might work. So I didn't have time, but I gave it to my wife, Beth Ann Fennelly, and I said, why don't you try this story? And she did, and did a great job at it, and gave it to me, and I edited it, and we gave it back and forth a few times. It was published, and my agent saw it and said, this should be your next book. You should write it together. My wife, the poet, said, no way. I'm not going to do it. It's too dangerous. She said, I've seen you and your deadlines, and I've actually been late on a deadline since 1998. I've never turned in a book on time. I've been up to a year late and as long as 5 years late. So she said, I don't like to be late on deadlines, and I think you'll probably make us late. I'm a fast writer, you're a slow writer. It's a bad idea. But I talked her into it. And she really loved it and got into it. And we mapped it out. It's set in 1927, the flood
Right.
of 27.
Yeah.
She writes the female moonshiner. I write the male revenue agent.
Right.
So they're natural enemies. There's natural sparks.
Right. Well, it is. Besides being an adventure story and an orphan story and a story of maternal desire, need, it's also a love story.
It's very much a love story, and we didn't
Yeah.
expect that. We knew it would be an adventure story set it with a flood as a backdrop,
Right.
and we thought it would be violent. The love caught us off guard. Maybe it's because we ourselves are very much still in love, even after this process. But what happened is she wrote. We mapped it out. She wrote her half, and I was supposed to be writing my half. My nightmare was she would have her half finished, and I wouldn't have started my half. That's what happened.
And these are alternating scenes.
Alternating.
Yeah, right.
His and then her, and then
Right,
his and
right,
her,
right.
all the way to the end. So and we knew what happened in every chapter. But I kept being sent on book tour for Crooked Letter.
Right.
We kept getting different trips, and I would go and come back, and she would have a new chapter written. I'd be happy for her, and angry with her at the same time, resentful and grateful at the same time. It was really interesting, these new emotions that I would experience. And we then wrote my half kind of together. We called it dueling laptops, sitting side by side. And then we wrote, and then we would write scenes and and compare notes. It really became a very organic and fun process.
I'm delighted. I think you took a risk, but it paid off. The book is called The Tilted World, and it comes out in October.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to finishing reading it and maybe talking with you about it someday in the future.
Well, thanks,
You
Don.
and Beth Ann.
Yeah.
Tom, this has been great fun. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Don. As always, it went really fast. Thank you.